Good. Because I want to start with a team that I think we're probably going to have the most in common, and that's CF Montreal. So a little bit about Montreal. Uh, a 2-1 crushing defeat on the last day of the season saw them finish out of the playoffs on 41 points, 2 points out of a playoff spot, just 1 year after being 2 points away from the top of the league, the Supporters Shield. They were one win away from winning the Supporters Shield last year, and now
That's
they are
crazy.
out of the playoffs. What went wrong? And I want to start this off because for me, it all happened before the first ball was ever kicked, starting with the loss of their head coach, which actually followed my second point. So maybe I'll mix that up. It started with losing your best players and not replacing. So they ripped apart their team. They were ruined by the European market, and all of their best players were gone from it. Then they decided the best way to replace that is with mid MLS guys and academy kids. So a list of players that are gone: Jordy Mihailovic, Ismail Kone, Alistair Johnston, Joaquin Torres, Kai Kamara, and Kamal Miller. All left. And then halfway through the season, they sent Rudy Camacho packing as well. This club that was one win away from the Supporters Shield were then blown to bits and replaced with Aaron Herrera, George Campbell, Ari Lassiter, and Bryce Duke. Now, on their own, those four players are not bad players. Like they're all good in their own way. But the biggest part for me is you lost a guy who carried your attack and replaced him with nobody, really. There was no real like for like replacement for him. There was not a single attacking designated player on the roster. And that is a big deal considering that your only attacking designated player the year before carried you. They set themselves up with a recipe for disaster, and they only scored 36 goals this year, second worst in the entire conference, only in front of that team, Toronto. I think they've forgotten that this is an MLS 1.0. You can't just blow your team up and think that you're just going to compete the next year and maybe sneak in because everybody else is spending big. You can't go cheap. I think they're going to need some significant investment next year to fix that, and it's going to start in the front, right? I think the back they can figure it out, but it needs to start in front.
I think you took the words right out of my mouth.
Naturally.
Mainly because we talked about this at the start of the season.
Yep.
Where we said that they blew up the team and they did a really poor job in the winter window of not replacing them. They made roughly 15 million euros in the winter. Sorry, across both transfer windows during this season. And no, sorry, they made 15 million. I am reading comprehension is not on my list of talents.
Oh boy.
They made 15 million euros in the winter, and then across both transfer windows this season, they spent less than 5 million of it to replace the team. And as you said, a lot of the replacements were, I feel like, players that they wanted to just kind of like get at a cheaper price and hope they kind of hit their potential with the team, which is just not a recipe for success. As you said as well, you can no longer get away with selling your super important players and trying to replace them with bargain deals with the academy. It seems like they saw what they were able to do with Jordy Mihailovic and then thought they can consistently do that, which is not the case. Mihailovic was the exception, not the rule, in terms of just getting a player at a bargain price and then building them up into a star and selling them on. That was definitely an exception case. You're not going to be able to do that consistently. And one other thing I wanted to note was, even the best youth systems, teams like Dallas and Philly, they buy key players to add to a team of academy and bargain players, but they're not there to replace the key players that depart. So, like, for example, Aaron Austin Trusty moves on from Philly. They bring in Jacob Gleesnes. Brendan Aronson moves on to RB Salzburg. They bring in Pozdag. Pepe moves on to Augsburg. They bring in Alan Velasco. So there seems to be like a good understanding with these academy teams that it's like, okay, we have good bargain players, we have good academy kids, but they're not going to be able to carry the team themselves. They need to like be able to replace their key players, then move on. And then I guess keeping with the theme that I've done for all of these, I try to like make name a solution. This one's very simple. Spend the money.
Um, yeah, that I'm gonna hit on that a little bit as we get to my third point, but I do want to go back to my second point, which was my first point originally, in where they lost their coach. So after they let go of Mihailovic, Kone, Johnston, Nancy packed up and left and went over to Columbus. And with Nancy, they had a coach with a clear game plan, a clear identity, a clear idea of what he wanted for the future, and a group of guys who he thought could implement it. And then as soon as he left, it all got blown up. They replaced him with Hernan Lasada, who was one of the youngest managers in the league. And when he was with DC, he struggled to find consistency. He was either inside of a 4 to 5 game winning streak or a 4 to 5 game losing streak at any time you looked at. So, for example, when he was at DC, his time in DC ended with a 5 game wins run. He lost 5 in a row and then was fired. Before that 5 games, he had a 4 game winning streak where he was people thought he was on top of the world. So they take a guy in whose streak he can't really find consistency, and they give him the broken pieces of a club torn to bits, and they expect him to work a miracle. And he nearly was able to do so, nearly slid them in there. But in the end, it all fell short, and it comes from a minus 16 goal differential where he wasn't able to defend properly. He didn't have the pieces to defend properly. Um, Again, that goal differential, second worst in the East, and is only, I'll say, bested, which isn't really the right word, but it's only beaten by, once again, Toronto FC, who was like minus 33 or something. Um, he couldn't make something out of nothing, which isn't a knock on Lasada because not many people can, but not Nancy could. Nancy came in and took a team in 2 years from bottom of the East to nearly the supporter shield. Lasada was given 1 year to do it, and it cost him his job. So that and you could see also what happened with Columbus, right? Caleb Porter missed the playoffs in 22. Nancy comes in, takes over from him, and puts them in a spot where they can make a run for a cup, right? So having the right guy in charge matters, and I don't think they had the right guy in charge, and now they're back in the market for it. So we'll see. I don't know if there's rumors, but I think Savarese might be a good shout for them. Guy in the West who understands the league. They might go overseas and pull somebody from their sister clubs or whatever. But um, yeah, definitely need the right guy in charge. I don't think they have.
I mean, in defense of Losada, he was so close to getting them in the playoffs.
Oh yeah,
A team that had no business being in the playoff hunt. So I feel it was a little harsh to sack him. I
or
feel like
no disagreements there. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I guess
yeah,
I should clarify. Like I'm not saying that Lasada was the reason that they missed the playoffs. I'm just
yeah,
saying when you're going to do this whole thing where you blow it up and you hope somebody can put it together, I just don't think he was the right guy for that job. Like if you put him in charge of the Montreal team that Nancy had, are they as good as Nancy? Maybe not, but is he as bad as he was now? No. I hope that's kind of the message that I can get across.
yeah. No, I didn't think you were putting the blame on Losada.
Okay, good.
I was just adding that I think that Losada actually did a pretty good job with what he was given, considering he was given literally nothing, and then nearly got them in the playoffs. Granted, it's an expanded playoffs, but still had them in the playoff hunt the entire year. When I mean, I personally ahead of the season thought they were going to be complete garbage. So
Yeah.
some credit there, definitely. My second point is I think you briefly touched on it as well, but just no goal scorer in this team. So when you get rid of the man that's giving Father Time a run for his money, that man being Kai Kamara, you better bring in a proven goal scorer to replace him. The problem is that their idea of a replacement for him was Chinoso 4, who was anything but proven in the league at that point. And what that ultimately led to was, pardon my awful French, Mathieu Chaunier, who played mostly as a center mid this season, being the club's top scorer with 5 goals. That is on par with both Toronto's top scorer, who was Bernadeschi and DeAndre Kerr, and worse than Colorado's top scorer, Cole Bassett. The strikers on the team combined for 14 goals, and that's across 5 different strikers on the team. I don't have the stats to show this, but I feel like Denny Bouanga had 14 goals by the midway point in the season by himself. I know there's a question of like maybe it was a situation where they were just not getting any chances. And honestly, that was probably a pretty big part in it. However, all but one of their strikers, and shout out to Adam because the one striker that did not fall into this category was Mason Toy, had a negative, and I'm gonna make up this. This is probably an actual stat, but I just made up a name because I didn't want to look up what it would actually be. GXG plus minus. So they were not finishing even the small amount of chances that they got. And I guess solution for this, it's going to be consistent with the first solution. You have 2 designated player spots open. You should have tons of money from the sales last winter. Do I need to do the math for you there?
I'd love you to.
Okay. Open designated player spots plus money equals sign big name designated player at striker.
Nice. Chonier is one of the earlier Montreal homegrown players, actually. So, um, he's been around the club for a little bit. Him and his brother was there too. Um, but your third point or your second point locks onto my third point. Um, Lack of firepower, lack of star power, right? Um, as I mentioned, Montreal only has one designated player on the roster, and he plays center back, and he barely broke 1,500 minutes this year. They don't have a single player who scored over 5 goals, like you mentioned, and they are rivaling Red Bull for the Play Your Kids champion title. They only have one player on the roster right now over the age of 30, and that's Victor Wanyama. The lack of attacking power in this group, plus the inability to stop shipping goals all over the place, was always going to be a disaster. But Montreal fans deserve their owners to start looking in the market. And for me, it's a designated player number 9, designated player number 10. And if you can get the Wanyama off a DP, whether it be selling him or moving, whatever, um, it's a designated player 6'8" to run the show. I think there was a stat out there. I was just reading that of the 8 teams that are left in the playoffs, 7 of them have a designated player in the 6'8". They're not all just attackers except for Seattle. So to have that stability through the spine of your team is super, super important. I don't think they have that right now. They were so close to the promised land in 2022. They blew it up, and now they're taking the kid movement. It just feels like it's not the right way to do things personally. So um, that's my last point on Montreal. I think they need to go in and they need to invest, like you mentioned. Um, and they need to find somebody who's going to be open in creating goals and playing in the MLS 4.0 system because your lack of goals is going to decide whether you're good or not. I mean, I think there was a team I was looking up before in the standings that, yeah, Atlanta shipped 53 goals this year, which is nearly 8 or 9 more than any other team in the playoff. But they scored 66, so they finished 6th, right? Like that's the league. The league isn't looking to be defensively stout like the Philly was last year. You know, they're looking to be big goal scorers, and if you're not going to step up to that, well, you're in trouble.
I do want to add on to that I feel like even if Seattle doesn't technically have a 6'8" designated player, they have players of that quality at the 6'8". They
Absolutely.
just
Yep. No
they just
disagreements
had
there.
good business and got them on lower than designated player deals.
Yep. Yep.
That's a great point. I think my last point pretty much goes hand in hand with that. So I, as you said before, I'm sure ahead of time we already knew that we were going to have like the same points on this one, but my last one was just that there's no stars on this team. Um, I feel like I've said this about multiple teams now, but you just cannot get away with not bringing in star game changers anymore. In defense of some teams, they at least try to bring them in. However, they may struggle to hit on them. That's one thing, but Montreal is not one of those teams. Their offseason consisted of trying to bring in under the radar signings from within the league that could maybe hit their potential and take the step up with the team, similar to the path that Jordy Mihailovic took. If you look
Yeah.
at every team left in the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
there is a star. or even multiple stars on every team. You know, Buanga at LAFC, Kundo Torres at Orlando, Cucho at Columbus, Lucci Acosta at FCC. If Montreal stuck into the playoffs like they nearly did, who would you say is their star? Kyoto, Opoku? I mean, they're good players, don't get me wrong, but they're not stars. Um, and I mean, solution, it's nothing new. It's spend the money, bring in a star. Try to find that magic you found when you brought in Drogba.
I will say that you can get away with not having stars if your goal is to just make the playoffs and be happy. But
Yeah,
that
which they
shouldn't.
nearly did, but
Yeah,
they wouldn't have like gotten I don't think they would have gotten far in the playoffs.
no, and I don't think that is anybody's goal of just, oh, let's just make the playoffs, and nobody walks out saying that's going to be their goal. So yeah, I
That's the
think
benefit of not having a pro rail system.
yeah,
You don't
but
have to just shoot for not getting relegated.
exactly. But again, just getting in, nobody's happy with that. Like there are people who are just happy with staying up. Nobody's happy just getting into the playoffs. Like
Yep.
Red Bull just made the playoffs, and was I happy? Yes. But when we lost, was I upset because we should have done more? Yes. Like there's no, oh man, we get to go for it another time. All right, we're getting down a bad path here.